everyone today to our third installment of the webinar series that we're bringing you today about how to recession-proof yourself, because we know that recession-proofing our individual selves against the market forces that threaten to kick us out of our industry or out of our businesses is extremely important. But as we think about what market downturns might look like in the next couple of years, we also see opportunities to recession-proof our entire business, which is what Lee is going to help us with today. And then tomorrow we're finalizing our kind of group of webinars here all about recessions with a conversation about how to protect your team if you're a department leader. So this is part of this kind of global consideration of what the recession is going to potentially bring to our organizations and how we can really move forward in a way that makes sense by protecting the entire corpus of knowledge, right, that's within our space. And so Lee Mixon is here joining us to tell us all about how to recession-proof your entire business. We're going to be talking a little bit about how government RFPs play a role in this. So if that's new to you, stay tuned. We'd love to give you that new information. At the end here, what you can expect is that Lee will give his presentation, and then we'll offer you an opportunity to actually head into a Q&A session with all of us at the end of the session, so that in a different Zoom room, so that you can ask us questions as we move forward. Keep in mind, I'm monitoring the chat. Lee is going to pay attention, and we can answer questions as we go, so don't be shy. We really want to hear from you as we continue. But without any further ado, Lee, kick us off.
All right, thank you, Catherine, and I thank Pi for inviting me to come and talk to you about recession-proofing your business. I hope I can provide you some good tips and some history lesson as well. See if I can get this working. Is it not working now? Here we go. So
it went.
Can you see? All right. So yeah, I'll introduce myself. I'll give you a little bit of a history lesson on some things that have happened in the past and why we think considering government contracts is useful for the future. And then I'll cover a little bit of an overview on that government contracting life cycle, so you can, for those who aren't in the government contracting, can kind of get that high level overview of how that starts and works. And how to get started in it. So, like I said, I'm Lee Mixon. I'm CEO of GovCon Bids. I'm the APMP Mid-South president or chapter chair. I'm also in Huntsville, Alabama. So I have joined the chamber as an ambassador, and I'm a service disabled combat veteran. I've spent 20 years in aerospace and defense operations, analytics, and business development. And I've been on 2 deployments to Iraq, and I have a master's in project management from Embry-Riddle and a bachelor's also from Embry-Riddle in aeronautics. I hold a PMP, CF APMP, and I've Shipley's business development certificate, the full life cycle certificate that they offer. So that's a little background on what I do. GovCon Bids is just been in business for 27 days now, and it's been blooming in those 27 days. But we spun the consulting services out of Bit Solutions, which is a partner of ours at GovCon Bids. So we have been doing consulting services since 2016. So let's talk about recession. So is it inevitable? I think on the news, and I haven't had a whole lot of time to watch the news lately, but I did see that they are trying to define what a recession is. So I can tell you that the Mad Money guy, Jim Cramer, says that the basic definition is just a 20% drop in the stock market. All the other things that they want to talk about really hasn't been historically the definition of what a recession is. I know that that comes with a lot of other pieces and parts. You know, I'm not an economist. I'm not going to get into all that, but the question is, will there be a recession? Yes, no, maybe. Are we in one right now? I don't know. I can tell you that's, you know, politics and all that. I don't want to get into that. So no matter what your views are, I can tell you that recession is inevitable. Whether it's now or later, it's just part of the economic cycle. I think everybody believes that or at least I am in belief of, everything has a cycle. The moon, the sun, everything. So the economy is going to have a cycle too. So I think that recession is inevitable. So I did do a little research on what has happened in the Great Depression, the Great Recession, and here lately, the pandemic. And here's what I found. In 1933, the Great Depression, the government, President Roosevelt, invoked the New Deal, which kind of hits home for me because I am in the Huntsville area there. You can see the Gunnersville Dam. It's probably the closest to where I am right now. I actually lived right there at it. I'm more in Huntsville now than I was a couple of years ago. I was in Gunnersville. But that hits home for me because it's the TVA and it's a big deal around this area. So President Roosevelt and the New Deal use that to help, use this particular program to help recover part of the Great Depression. And what it did was it provided electricity to the rural Tennessee River Valley while creating jobs by providing $1.7 billion in funding for domestic programs. And in 1933, $1.7 billion was a much larger number than it is to us today. But you can see that, the trend here, or the beginning of what I'm going to show as a trend, was the government spending was instrumental in coming out of the Depression. So also in 2007, 2009, the Great Recession, I believe it began like December 2007 and believed to be the worst economic downturn the country has experienced since the Great Depression. And in that response, Congress passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which included $800 billion to promote economic recovery. And you can see the different categories that they spent it in by cutting taxes. They extended unemployment benefits. They added money to education and healthcare spending. They allocated $275 billion in federal contracts, grants, and loans that help create jobs. So since then, we've had what? The pandemic recently, right? 2020 to now, Congress has spent $4.7 trillion in emergency assistance for people, for business, healthcare, your state and local governments. You can see here, some of the major programs was for state, tribe, and territory assistance, K through 12 and higher education, vaccine and testing. So in the healthcare department, housing, transportation, small business, broadband. So they're spreading that money throughout all aspects of industry. And that is going to, kind of prove what I'm trying to show today is that, the government spending in hard times, recessions, depressions, and pandemics is opportunity for small businesses to kind of recession-proof themselves. So, so to recap that, whether a recession is looming or we're already in it, it doesn't really matter. We have a recession now, yes. Prep for some government contracts to help supplement your income, your business's income and portfolio. One of the things that we were talking about just before here that I took out of my slides because I didn't really have any hard proof or what websites that I could show you to go visit. But I had heard that in the UK during the Great Recession, commercial spending dropped 10% and about 10%, and then government spending went up about 6 to 8%. I think I found that in the US, and I couldn't find it to say the way I wanted it to say it, but it was about a 20% drop in commercial spending and about a 10% rise in government spending. So don't hold me to that, but that's kind of what I've been hearing out there as some of the numbers of what's going on and what has happened. So I
Lee,
think,
I've got a question.
yeah.
I've got a question for you real quick. Okay, so are you going to touch on, and this may be coming later, but I don't want to spoil it for the viewers, but are you going to touch on where we can find some of these contracts? Because I feel like there's a ton of people here who don't really know how to get started.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna cover some of the basics on how to get started in government contracting. And to find them, there's several different ways, and I think we'll touch, if you'll hold that question till the next slide,
Cool.
I think it'll fit in better there. So government, historically spends money to get out of depressions and recessions and pandemics, with 1.7 billion spent on just one project in the Great Depression, 800 billion spent in the Great Recession, and 4.7 trillion spent on the pandemic. So I don't know what your goals are, but personally, if I had 0.2% of some of all that, I would be retired and, have generational wealth and all the great things that would come with that. But, so I'm out there trying to do what everybody else is doing too. But yeah, so if there's a recession now, if there's not a recession now, there's going to be one. If there is one, let's prep for some government contracts and get recession proof as best we can. So how do you do that? Here we go. So first thing you have to do is register to sam.gov. All your opportunities will be there. There's others like GovWin and BGov and several different other things. But if you want your company to go after government contracts, they do have to be registered in sam.gov. And then, you have to ask yourself, have you already been, in government contract world? Are you a subcontractor to a prime? If you are, great. Now you can start, building up enough past performance where you can prime it yourself, or go after some primes yourself. If you're new to it, then I would suggest go and find some primes and see if you can be a subcontractor to those primes, so you can get the past performance required and start building up enough money to do some of the things that I'm going to show you on the next slide. But having that past performance is what you'll need, so you can prime your efforts yourself. And when you get to that point, then you've gone a long way to recession proofing your business.
Lee, can you give us an example of what a prime contractor does as opposed to somebody on a subcontract? Because I know we've got some people who are kind of brand new into the industry here. So what's an example of a really well-known prime, and what types of things might they subcontract out?
Well, I'm going to talk about one that I recently did because it's kind of more fresh in my mind. But the NASA METS contract, which is a Marshall space flight right here in Huntsville, needed some services, professional services, and they would put out an RFP requesting, the types of engineers that they need, the types of back office support that they would need to support, whatever project they're running. They're going to need the engineers and the professional people, to project managers and whatnot, to be able to run that program that they need ran. So that would be a prime contract. A subcontractor would come in handy whenever, say, the engineering slot that they needed was a very specific engineering slot that's hard to find, or a specialty type engineer. Then you might have a smaller company that has that specialty that they could bring on to bolster their, what they have to offer the government, and you'll be able to fill the slots that they need. So subcontractors could provide services or parts and supplies, and plethora of different options. So whatever it is your specialty is, that's what you need to play your strengths to, and talk to your primes and say, I can offer this, get me on your contract and we'll do this for you, and we'll do a really good job. So that will get you in the door, and then you start getting that experience in the past performance that you can then write to whenever you're going to be a prime, and really increase your portfolio.
And when I have one more question, because this is really interesting to me. When is it appropriate, when you're a subcontractor, like at what stage in your business can you start thinking about partnering up with these prime organizations? Like, can you, like, if you're a startup and you want to start going for stuff right away, or do you wait until you have a couple clients? Like, when do you start making that decision?
So I have seen it just as small as one person who has a specialty in, say, avionics or engineering, a specific type of engineering, and they would leverage their own past experience as the company's experience and talk to the primes right away. You don't have to go get smaller contracts, or you're actually better off, and it's an easier path to sell yourself to a larger company who has the prime contract and say, okay, and a lot of it's capture and BD, where business development, where you have to find out who needs what and who needs your services, and that's the ones you want to talk to, and then you can strike up a deal and get on their prime contract and start getting that past performance. Or if there's a company trying to take a contract away from during a recompete, and you have some services that would be beneficial to their overall development of their proposal, then that would be another way to get in. And if they win it, then you're in. You start getting that subcontracting past performance.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thanks for answering that, because it's a question I hear all the time. Is it too early for me to start thinking about building these relationships? My argument is it's never too early,
Never.
but I would love to hear from an expert. So that's good. That's really good to hear that. That's validated.
Never too early. Always be out doing business development and relationship building. It's really what it's all about, especially in Huntsville. It's about the relationships still. They call it the good old boy system, but it's really just relationships and building those relationships, ensuring that you ask about their mama and them before you ask about business. Little things that
Yep.
So this right here is a very high level roadmap of any company wanting to get into government contracts. The first step, like I said, is get into sam.gov. If you have any special designators, like you're a woman-owned small business or a service disabled veteran-owned small business, or your office is in a hub zone, these are the things that you want to leverage. So make sure you go to the SBA and get registered as that designation, so you can use it, and it gives you more points when going after the contracts, and it helps larger businesses fulfill their small business quotas and requirements that are out there and required by the government. You say they need a certain percentage of service disabled veteran-owned small businesses on their subcontracting plan. These are things you can help leverage yourself to get on those contracts.
Okay, we do have one question. Sorry, we have one
Yeah.
question from the gallery that I think would be really, really useful here. Meredith Clark is asking, is GovCon bids and what they provide, is that information given on a GSA on their own, or on the primes GSA? Like, where can you find that?
Ask that again, because I got.
It's okay. Is GovCon, this is a little bit, Meredith, we might ask you to clarify here a little bit. Actually, maybe I can unmute you and you can ask. I don't know how to do that. Is GovCon bids and what they provide, is that on a GSA schedule, so their own or a primes?
So if you're asking about GovCon bids, my company, no. But if you're asking about government contracting bids, then yeah, all that information, the government contracting RFPs. So that's where I'm getting confused as to which way she's trying to ask the question.
No, Meredith's asking whether you're on a GSA.
I am not. What I do,
Okay.
what my company does, is help government contracts win more contracts. And our specialty is in the opportunity pipeline services. So anything from like a 5-year growth plan to capture management to building proposals and getting them submitted. That's where we stay in our niche. So having a government contract on our own isn't really in our model. So, but thank you. Although that, you just sparked a little thought in my head. Maybe I could change that a little bit later and get a project manager or something on a team somewhere and have some growth there myself. So yeah, you want to make sure you have your past performance built up. All right, so I think that covers this slide pretty well. So even while you're being a sub to a prime, some of the things that you need to think about in your further growth to prep yourself to prime an opportunity yourself is getting the basic business certifications that the governments require on these government RFPs. And a lot of it is, your ISO 9001, you got to have your quality management system in place, and it has to be, certified that it's, in line and in check with the ISO. Your DCAA compliant accounting methods, has to be checked off and audited. And CMMC compliance is, just blowing up everything right now with, it's basically embedding itself in every piece of contract there is, just to ensure that we have cybersecurity. So, and then you have to kind of look at any required certifications that's specific to your industry. And I wouldn't know what all they are. You would have to talk to your friends and your coworkers and find out, other businesses and that does that. But for instance, like aviation manufacturing and maintenance would also require like an AS 9100 and AS 9110, which is a aviation specific quality management on top of the ISO 9001. So they'd have to have both, and it's just more certifications. So you just want to make sure that you can check all the blocks whenever the RFP does come out, and you have all the certifications required to even go after it. So you want to make sure you save up some money for that to be able to do it, because they're not cheap to get all this audited and certified.
Can your business help people understand what they need before they start doing these? Like where, if I'm a new contractor, I'm like, oh, I know there's government money out there. I know I can go to a PTAC, which I've linked here in the chat.
Right.
But does that a service that you all can offer as well, to say, hey, we'll get you lined up, we'll get your forms taken care of, or can you recommend some people that might be able to help us out with that?
I would
process?
recommend the PTACs, honestly, because they have access to industry professionals from whatever industry you're in, and they can tell you and show you the best ways to get it done. But I mean, if anybody wanted to contact me and ask me, I can definitely point them in the right direction or help them out if it's not, but that's not really in our model. If they were going after a specific RFP and a proposal and hired us to do that or capture and that could fall in the capture management category where I'm like, hey, you want to go after this opportunity, but you don't have your DCAA accounting certified yet. Let's go get that done. We can start helping them get it done that way. But just to call us up and say, hey, can you help me get a DCAA accounting compliance set up? I'll point you towards the PTAC probably.
Gotcha. And that's linked in the chat. And the PTAC is Procurement Technical Assistance Center, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
They're nationwide.
Yeah, and I know the Huntsville one's great. I know that. I've been to several of their briefings, so definitely highly recommend using them.
Cool.
So, any of the government contracts, one thing they all have in common is, they're going to produce an RFP, and companies are going to be allowed to bid on them if they follow all the, can check all the boxes. But what you need to do is make sure you define a repeatable process for working with the government so you can support their requirements. The basic capture, life cycle, government contracting life cycle, you would want to go out and identify something that fits what you do and fits what you want to go after, what's in your growth plan. And then you're going to qualify that to make sure that it's not, something the government's going to kind of peter out on or sole source to an ANC, or, there's all kinds of things you want to go out and make sure that it's going to continue going down the path. There's funding for it. So that's part of the qualification. And then the pursuit, which a lot of people get confused between qualifying and pursuing. Well, not confused. They use them interchangeably a lot. But to pursue it, you want to make sure that it's, again, going to have the funding for it. And it falls within the realm of what you can do and should do. And then it falls into the capture, where a lot of resource and time and energy is spent. So, you want to make sure you do 1, 2, and 3 before you get to 4, because capture can get expensive, and it can run 2 years of just paying people to go follow General so-and-so to all his little talks and making sure you're in front of his, face, shaking his hand, talking to him, finding out what his problems are. So you could do that for 2 years, just getting all the information you need to actually have a bid, no bid decision on whether this is the right opportunity you want to spend the money on and put your name out. Because when you do a proposal, it's marketing. Even if you don't win, you were in front of the customer. Your proposal was there. You're talking about them, you're talking about you, what you can do for them. It's a big marketing document. So sometimes you want to go after it even if you're not going to win it and it's already primed for somebody, just so you can get in front of the customer. Sometimes you don't want to do that because if you don't know what you're talking about, or it comes in read wrong, then you can put a mark against you instead of for you. So it's something you have to really decipher through the capture stage before you get to that go no go decision in proposals. So, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about the win lose and what you should do no matter which way you go. If you win the contract or lose the contract, there's certain things that you need to prepare for the next go round. So is the contract worth pursuing? It's all about asking the right questions, and timing is an issue that can affect the potential contract. So you want to make sure that you can get as much information as you can, because you could be faced with a recompete down the road, and you want to save all that data that you get so you can use it next time for decisions there as well. So the tracking process is simple. You get into the details of the agency and learn what the challenges are, and see if you have a way of solving them. That's
Lee, I've got a question real quick. So for those of us who are kind of like, a lot of us are in commercial bids, or like we have maybe a cursory experience with federal contracts or federal proposals and things along these lines. What can you tell us a little bit more, like, because the investigation part in this stage to understand go or no go is going to be much more complicated on a federal bid, in my perspective. So like, who are we bringing in to have these conversations, and what are some of the, like, what are maybe some of the differences between this like kind of fast and loose way? We were talking about this earlier, about the fast and loose way that commercial bids are done as compared to how federal bids are done, and how might that affect your decision-making process at this stage?
So in the identification stage, it's really a fast and loose decision, because not a whole lot of money and time has been spent on it yet. It's really about, hey, I've heard of a contract that might be coming up that fits, what we do in IT or engineering or whatever. I'm going to go go talk to somebody and see if I can find out more information. Does this fit our 5-year growth plan of where we want to go? Maybe it happens to fall into a section that we thought maybe in our company was dying off, and we really don't want to go after it, or it's something that we have some experience in and want to get a lot more. So you got to know where it falls in that growth plan. So it's really a high level decision in the identification stage, as opposed to the next stage where you start finding out, do you really want to put some money into this, and start finding out, going to talk to people, going to have meetings, and getting more information from the government, because they're still open book at this point. We haven't hit a blackout period. Once the RFP drops, you can't talk to anybody except for the contracting officer, and they're not going to be very forthcoming with any information, because if they give you something, they have to give it to everybody. So at that point, they become really close-lipped. So you got to make sure, not every contract works for every company, and you just have to know what your goals are and what your strengths are at this point, and what your weaknesses, so you can maybe team up with somebody to counteract your weaknesses. So before moving forward with the qualification stage, just make sure the government is committed to the opportunity. The money's going to be there. You don't want to spend 3 months of chasing this information and find out that, well, they've changed their mind. It's a finicky. It was just an idea that the contracting officer or whatever had.
Yeah, make sure the budget's really there, right?
Yeah, you got to go talk to them, the program managers and PMs, to make sure that it was a need that they really had and the funding is there. And it's, they've lined up their ducks in a row. So it would get down to where they needed it to be.
We've got another really relevant question here, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Ben's got one for us. Okay, how do you feel about bidding on municipal group contracts like HGAC, Sourcewell, California Government Purchasing? They award a lot of winners, but getting in a pool like this, does this help your business get farther down the line because it's a bid to be a vendor? Like, how do you feel about those procurement groups?
So I have seen them work really well, and I have seen them just be a spot on their website saying that they have it and not really produce any revenue. I think it really depends on, are you set up to deal with those task orders as they come in and really execute on those task orders, or are you just, trying to say you have a win? I've seen it go both ways. So it's really about what you do with it afterwards and what you can do with it. I think some of the qualifications should have been vetted better. If they get on I call it an IDIQ, they get on a procurement group like that and get no task orders out of it, then somebody didn't do their job up front to find out that there was whether there were going to be any work in there that would be worth actually doing or something they could win. But when it does work well, I've my last company got on some, and the task orders were rolling out on a weekly basis, and they were winning a month, winning something every month. So it was just turn and burn, do every 2 weeks, something's coming out. They had the capabilities, they were on the right team, they had the right, everything was lined up like it was supposed to be, and it's a cash generating machine. So it's definitely something to look at and dive deep into before you spend all your money trying to get on one that's not right for you. So, okay. So once you've finished evaluating your leads, you want to decide, you want to have a good list of opportunities that are actually worth you spending time and further money on, because you're going into that capture stage where you're really going to put a budget to it and, let the capture manager loose and tell him to go find out, what the solution to their government's problems are, and go, get some win themes and find out who else is going after it and getting all that competitive data. And I mean, you could spend a lot of time and money on it. So at this point, I think at this point is where your go, no go decision. One of your gate reviews is important. Because you don't want to put a budget to something without some serious thought and having the right people in it, C-suites, executive levels, to buy off on that budget expenditure. So, and then, like I said, you get into the RFPs shaping. There's the capture stage it's when the detailed solutioning begins to solve the government problems. Like I said, the win themes, differentiators, competitor analysis will develop, and a more complete picture of your P-win will shape, which is your probability of winning it. It's factored in many different ways. Some companies do it off gut feeling. I don't suggest that. I suggest having some serious questions that are weighted, that will calculate a P-win for you, and give you a basis of, and honestly, in my opinion, I don't care if 68% is what you want to shoot for or 38% is what you want to shoot for. As long as it's weighted correctly and that's your mark, then that's what you want to shoot for. I think that's what really matters. And I've got a whole nother webinar that's on capture management that if you're interested in, you can let me know. But there's just so many parts and pieces to this part of it that I didn't want to dive into it, or we'd be here all weekend doing class. So yeah, so the capture phase can last a while, and it's very detailed. So that's, you want to get in there and learn that, and bring in experts if you need it, because if you don't know what you're doing in the capture, then you could miss out on a lot of great opportunities. and end up going after things that maybe you shouldn't have, and spending a lot of money doing it. And then everybody knows the proposal, devil's in the details, that this is really just about, getting a proposal manager coordinates the response, creation, manages the compliance, and finalizes it. And then the RFP itself, just, submitting it's usually a one-day event that everybody, all I can say is do not make changes that day. I don't even, if there's nothing else, I know, don't do it. I've seen so many companies do it and end up just putting something in there inadvertently that just didn't make sense and messing everything up when they should have just left it on. It's a lot like taking a test. The first answer is probably the right one. Don't go changing it because you've had time to think about it. Now you're just kind of shooting from the hip, and more mistakes are made that way. But what I really wanted to get into was the win or lose. If you win the government contract, then that's when the real work begins. And for a limit, the contract is for a limited time. So your company needs to start capturing data right away for its recompete. It might be 5 years away, but that data you capture now is going to serve your proposal 5 years from now to be able to recompete that information or recompete that contract and keep it on your books instead of it going to somebody else's. But you need to focus on performing well and capturing the data. The CPARs that you get and the monthly reports, I think, are the golden eggs here. You definitely want to make sure you perform well to get the CPARs, but your monthly reports, I have seen all too often, your program managers, they write the report, they know their jargon, they know their acronyms, they kind of do it in a shorthand. The government they're giving it to, as their report knows the shorthand, they know what they're saying. But a proposal person who 5 years from now is trying to dig in and find that feel-good story can't read it, and they can't search it. They can't put it, do a search in SharePoint or a search in the document and find what they're looking for because it's in jargon and in shorthand and in acronyms, and you end up missing the best story of your proposal because you can't find it. So one of the things that I tell every company that I talk to is just make sure that your monthly reports make them spell it out from the beginning, make them, give full details, because that information is invaluable and it's what you need to continue on and to grow. So don't do that. So, and if you lose it, of course, you want to know why. You want to do your debrief. You want to get that information on what you could do better, and always ask for a debrief, whether you win or lose, because you're going to get invaluable information on the winning as well. It's funny though, many times the government's more open to tell you why you won it than they are to tell you why you lost it. Because if they tell you why you lost it, they're giving you ammo to, contest it. And they don't want to do that because they don't want it to go into, months and months of waiting on the GAO to come back with their report. So winning might be the best time to ask them. Always ask, but winning might be the best time to ask them. Why did you win it? What did you find? What can I do? And I think that'll be the best thing you can do for that. And with that kind of ends my overview of recessions and government, getting into government contracting overview and some specifics to watch out for. And if you need any other questions or comments, I'll be hanging around at the other Zoom room. I guess we're going to a different Zoom room.
Yeah, we're going to do a Q&A session after this, with like a little bit informal, so everybody can kind of pull up their Zooms and have their they're not encumbered by the fact that we're in a webinar. Lee, I do have a couple more questions for you here, because like just from my own background and experience is that So what I'm hearing a lot is that if we're looking to get into federal contracting, there's just a lot more complexity. So I'm curious about this concept. I think maybe even people on our team here don't know what capture managing, like what that
Okay.
term is and what it kind of tends to encompass. So if we're like, if I'm a new business, do I need a capture manager? Should I be looking for a consultant like you right away? Like how does capture management work just on a real high level if I'm looking to start into this
Sure.
recession proofing process?
So I can tell you what most people do, and in small business, you, it, I think everybody can relate to this. You wear multiple hats. You're going to be operations, you're going to be BD, you're going to be, HR, you're going to be all of it, finance. But if you were to invest anywhere, I would invest in opportunity pipeline services that can help you set it up correctly, because that is the lifeline of your business. And all too often that happens afterwards. They, maybe get lucky, or they pretty good enough to know what's going on to get that first contract or subcontract. But to set your processes and your procedures up properly, I would definitely suggest bringing in a seasoned consultant that can, and it's not like they have to do 40 hours a week for 8 weeks and it's some big bill at the end, but 3 or 4 or 5 hours a month to help you work through what you're working through, and they say, okay, let's set it up this way, let's look at that, would be invaluable in the end. And they might just say, hey, you need to go talk to so and so, go see what so and so says, let's look at, just kind of point you in the right direction, and not actually go do capture management for you. If you get to the point where you can actually hire a capture manager to go after several different opportunities and grab all that information, then absolutely you wouldn't want to do that. But to start off, I would just use them to kind of direct you into where you need to go and what questions to ask, what to say, what you need to know to move forward.
Okay, so get training from a consultant. I think that's absolutely spectacular, because if you show up and you spend all that money, government bids are expensive, right? Because they're so much more complicated. You got to get the tools, you got to do all this pre-work, like what we're talking about over here in the chat right now. And I think that it's super important to make sure that you get some education around that. So like, absolutely find somebody like Lee to get that information into your hands. Second thing I want to talk about is what industries, as we're moving into the recession like this, like honestly, what I start thinking about is what industries are vulnerable in the private sector, but not vulnerable in the public space. And so I'm thinking about like transportation. There's probably a ton of money in transportation. There's probably a ton of money right now in digital infrastructure around like Amazon Web Services, or like IT services that are trying to help spread information. So do you have any like hot button industries that are good for us to diversify our portfolio into?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, cyber is hot, because everybody's worried about China and Russia dipping into our nuclear power plants or our electrical grid, or just there's a lot of espionage going on with just taking engineering drawings from different UAVs and missiles. And I mean, so cyber is definitely a hot button right now, that they're going to pump a lot of money into and do really well. If you went after that, you could do really well. I think infrastructure, they passed the large infrastructure bill, which is what I don't know, it was 1.7 trillion, or I can't remember, don't quote me. But it was a huge amount of money into the infrastructure bill that will go towards roads and bridges. And, I think even some of that's going to be in IT infrastructure, making sure the electrical grids are up to date. And, so there's a lot going on, and with Russia and going into Ukraine, there's a hotbed in the aerospace and defense, the defense, especially the missiles and the javelins and all the things that really haven't been doing that well since the last like real war, a boots on ground type war, has gotten a boost in funding, and is a hotbed out of Huntsville right now. So I can see those.
Okay, great. We're in the chat here. We're seeing a lot of people talk about infrastructure and that cybersecurity piece as
Yeah.
well. What I've seen kind of emerging as well is kind of this almost data analytics, like, and there's some spicy stuff going on with that, but data analytics and like population um phenomena, like how to protect schools from people who are posting things that are how to keep schools safe, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to, how to keep schools safe by looking at social media is a really, like, there's a lot of like almost emergency funding being sent towards some of those like social media analytics platforms that are coming out of government spaces as well. So it's really interesting. But Roxanne here says watch the news and see where the money goes, and like try to see if your stuff can align with any of that. 100% agree with that. There's no reason, even if it seems like you're not in a related industry, those people who are doing the infrastructure stuff, they need HR,
Yep.
they need IT support. So like even if it seems like you're not in a related industry, go find those primes, start talking to them and say like, hey, do you need these ancillary services? And you might be surprised. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely hit your local networking, and just talk to. I have found over the last 7 months of transitioning out of a W-2 into my own business and talking to people that I wouldn't think had any connection. I found connections that, I've learned a lot just over the last few months that, hey, talk to everybody, because you don't know what's out there or what connections they have or know that can teach you things. There's so much I don't know that it's almost scary.